You learn a lot about a person by how they treat something that isn't theirs yet. I didn't know that at 63. I know it now. It was a Saturday morning in October, the kind where the air outside still smells like summer, but something in your bones knows it's over. I was at my kitchen table in Savannah, second cup of coffee, not really reading the newspaper, just holding it the way you do when you need something to do with your hands. My phone buzzed. A text from my son-in-law, Nathan. Not from my daughter. From Nathan. Hey, Dottie. Just wanted to float something by you. Lynette and I have been talking, and we think the cottage would be perfect for us to use as a home base going forward. The kids are getting older, and they need consistency. We figured since you're not up there as much anymore, it just makes more sense for us to take over the arrangements. Hope that's okay. Talk soon. I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee, and looked out the window at my neighbor's oak tree for a long time. The cottage. My cottage. The one I built with my own hands. Not literally, I'm not a carpenter, but with my money, my decisions, my weekends for 4 years driving up to Blue Ridge, Georgia to check on the crew, to pick out the pine flooring, to argue with the contractor about the porch railing, because I wanted cedar and he kept pushing composite. The one I named after my husband Gerald, who died of a heart attack at 61 before he ever got to sleep a single night inside it. The one Nathan wanted to take over the arrangements for. I want to tell you I called him back immediately and said something sharp and final, but that's not what I did. I sat at that table for almost an hour. Then I called my daughter. Let me go back a little, because none of this makes sense without understanding what the cottage was. Gerald and I had been married 37 years when he died. We met when I was working as an office manager at an insurance firm in Savannah, and he came in to dispute a claim, professionally, politely, absolutely certain he was right, which it turned out he was. I liked that about him immediately. A man who was calm when he thought he was being wronged. That's a rare thing. We bought our house in Midtown Savannah in 1991. We raised 2 kids there. Lynette and my son, Darnell, who lives in Portland now with his husband and their dog. Gerald was a high school history teacher for 28 years. I eventually moved into hospital administration. We weren't wealthy, but we were careful, and careful adds up over time. The cottage idea started as a joke. Gerald used to say that when he retired, he wanted to sit on a porch in the mountains and do absolutely nothing for an entire week. Just watch birds, Dottie. That's all I want. He'd say it at least once every summer. I'd say, Gerald, you've never watched a bird in your life. He'd say, that's the point. He retired in June. He was dead by September. The doctor said it was sudden but not surprising. His cholesterol numbers had been a quiet alarm for years that none of us took seriously enough. He was there and then he was not, and the world kept going, which is the cruelest thing about losing someone. The world does not pause for your grief. The oak tree in my neighbor's yard kept growing. My phone kept ringing with people I needed to respond to. My daughter called every day for the first month, then every few days, then once a week, which is normal and right, I know that. People have their own lives. I understood. But I had a hole in mine the size of a man-shaped space in every room. About 8 months after Gerald passed, I got the life insurance payout. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real money. Combined with my pension and what I'd saved, I had enough to do something. I didn't want to spend it on cruises or a new car. I wanted to do the thing we never got to do together. I wanted to build him his porch in the mountains. So that's what I did. I found a piece of land outside Blue Ridge, Georgia, about 2.5 hours north of Savannah, through a real estate agent who was patient with me asking every question twice. It was 3 acres, sloped toward a creek, with enough tree cover that in the summer you couldn't see the neighboring property. It felt private. It felt like exhaling. I hired a small local firm to build a 2-bedroom cottage, nothing grand. Knotty pine floors, a stone fireplace, a wraparound porch facing the creek. I ordered a pair of rocking chairs from a craftsman in LJ. I planted a rose bush by the front steps. Gerald's mother had a rose bush outside every house she ever lived in, and I thought he'd have liked knowing that. 4 years from the first survey to the keys in my hand. I drove up alone for the first night. I sat on that porch in one of the rocking chairs and I told him about it. I described everything out loud. The floors, the stone, the sound the creek makes, all of it, the way you talk to someone who can't see what you're seeing. I cried some. Then I opened a bottle of wine and watched the dark come in over the trees and felt something I hadn't felt in almost 2 years. I felt okay. For a while, everything was as good as I'd hoped. I went up most months, sometimes alone, sometimes with my friend Claudette from work, sometimes with Darnell when he came through on his way somewhere else. Lynette and Nathan brought the grandchildren, Avery and the twins, up a few summers, and I loved that. Watching Avery catch her first crawdad in the creek, the twins learning that a fireplace is not a toy through one singed eyebrow incident. I will not go into detail about. Nathan was charming in those early years. That's the word I keep coming back to. Charming. He had a way of making suggestions that sounded like compliments. The first time he floated the idea of extending the back deck, he framed it as, "Dottie, this place is so beautiful it deserves more outdoor space." I said I'd think about it. He mentioned it again at Christmas. Then the following spring, he sent me a link to a deck contractor's website, already bookmarked with a specific design. I didn't do the deck. I should have understood then. But I chose to see it as enthusiasm, and enthusiasm isn't something you punish people for. The asks got more specific over time. Could they store the kayaks in the shed over winter, permanently? Could Nathan put in a fire pit in the side yard the way he wanted, gas line instead of wood, totally different aesthetic? And by the way, he'd already priced it out. Could Lynette's college roommate use the cottage for a bachelorette weekend in June? The same June weekend I'd already told Lynette I was planning to be up there myself. That last one is when I said no clearly for the first time. I said I had plans for that weekend. Lynette said, "Mom, you can be flexible. It's not like you have anything on your calendar." I said I did have something on my calendar. I was going to be at the cottage. There was a silence on the phone that I can only describe as expensive, like something was being calculated. She said fine. The roommate found somewhere else. But things shifted after that, and I don't think I was imagining it. The voicemail came on a Thursday evening, 7:22. I remember because my Thursday routine ends with Wheel of Fortune, and I just turned it on. It was Nathan, not Lynette. Nathan. "Hey Dottie, hope you're doing great. So listen, Lynette and I have been doing a lot of thinking about next summer. And we realized that with the kids' schedules and everything, we'd really love to have more consistent access to the cottage. Like, make it more of a family hub. We're thinking we'd kind of take over managing it going forward. Handle the maintenance, the scheduling, all of that. We know you're busy and it's a lot to manage from Savannah. We think this just makes more sense for everyone. Give us a call." I listened to it once, then again, then a third time. He said, "Family hub." He said, "We'd kind of take over." He said, "Makes more sense for everyone." And somehow everyone did not appear to include me. I called Lynette. She answered on the second ring, which told me she was expecting my call. "Mom, did you know Nathan was going to leave me that message?" A pause. "We talked about it together. We both think." Lynette. "That cottage belongs to me. I built it with your father's life insurance money and my pension. I own it. Nathan doesn't manage anything that's mine." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Mom, you're being a little dramatic. He's just trying to help." I want to tell you exactly what I said next, but here's the honest truth. I said very little. I said we'd talk soon. I said we'd talk soon. I said goodbye. I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I called my attorney. I want to say something here, because I know what some people think when they hear a story like this. Just tell them no, it's simple. And yes, in theory, it is simple. But there is nothing simple about looking at your daughter's face across a table and saying no to her, knowing she'll go home and tell her husband, knowing he'll turn it into something else, knowing there will be consequences in the form of fewer calls, thinner holidays, grandchildren you see less often. The math of family love is not clean. It never is. But I had already learned the hard way that every time I softened a no into a maybe, it became a yes. And I was tired of ending up on the wrong side of sentences I never agreed to. My attorney, a woman named Patricia, different Patricia, not from any list you know, sent Nathan and Lynette a letter. Formal, measured, unemotional. It stated that the property was solely in my name, that no arrangement transferring management or access rights had been agreed upon, and that any future scheduling of the property required my direct written consent. Nathan called me the day after they received it. He was not charming. He said I'd gone behind Lynette's back. He said this was not how family operates. He said I had made a legal thing out of a simple conversation. He said, and I'm going to quote this directly because I've turned it over in my mind many times. Dottie, I just think you need to ask yourself what kind of relationship you want to have with your grandchildren. I let him finish. Then I said, Nathan, I want a relationship with my grandchildren that doesn't require me to surrender my home. I'll talk to Lynette when she's ready to call me herself. He hung up. Lynette didn't call for 11 days. When she did, she cried. She said she felt caught in the middle. I told her I was sorry she felt that way, but that I hadn't put her there. She said Nathan was just trying to look out for the family. I said I was the family too. We talked for a long time that night. It wasn't resolved. It wasn't clean. But it was honest, which is more than we'd had for a while. Here's the part of the story I haven't told yet. 2 months after that letter went out, I drove up to the cottage on a Friday afternoon. The code on the lockbox had been changed. I stood on my own front porch, the cedar-railed porch I'd argued about and won, and I could not get into my house. There were signs that people had been there recently, a pair of Nathan's sneakers by the door, a bag from a restaurant I didn't recognize near the window. They had been using my house, and then they had changed the code so I could not come in unannounced. I stood there for a moment. Then I got back in my car, drove 10 minutes into town, and called a locksmith. He met me at the property within the hour. I showed him my name on the deed. I keep a photo of it on my phone, which turned out to be a useful thing to have, and he changed every lock on the property. Front door, back door, the shed. I had the new keys in my hand by 4 in the afternoon. I did not call Lynette to tell her. I stayed the weekend. I sat on the porch both mornings. I made eggs on Sunday and ate them at the table Gerald never got to sit at, and I thought about what I was going to do. I had a real estate agent up there within 2 weeks, not because I wanted to sell. I want to be clear about that. I wanted to know what my options were. The agent, a straightforward woman in her 50s who'd grown up in Blue Ridge, walked through the property and gave me a number. It was a good number. The market had been kind to mountain cottages since the pandemic. Property like mine, creek access, finished interior, established landscaping, was exactly what people from Atlanta were looking for. I didn't decide that day. I went home to Savannah and thought about it for a month. What I kept coming back to was this. I had built that place as a refuge, a place where I could breathe, and I could not breathe there anymore. Every room had become contested territory. The rocking chairs felt like something being argued over. Even Gerald's rose bush felt caught up in it somehow, which I know is irrational, but grief is not always rational. The question wasn't whether I could legally keep the cottage. I could. The question was whether I could ever feel at peace there again. I also thought about money. Practically, the way Gerald would have. I was 64. My pension was solid but fixed. The cottage sale would give me enough to purchase a smaller place in my own name, upgrade some things I'd been putting off in my Savannah house, and set aside a meaningful amount that Nathan would never, in any universe, have any claim on. I consulted with my financial planner. We talked about how to structure things. I updated my will. Not in anger, in clarity. Then I called the real estate agent and told her to list it. It sold in 3 weeks. Cash offer over asking. The buyers were a couple from Dunwoody. She was a physical therapist. He worked remotely for a tech company, and they wanted to close before the end of the year for tax reasons. That worked for me. I signed the papers on a Wednesday in early December. I called Darnell that evening and told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mom, Was it the right thing? I said. I think it was the true thing. Sometimes that's what right looks like. He said he was proud of me. That meant more than I expected it to. I did not tell Lynette and Nathan until after closing. I sent Lynette a text. Short. Clear. The cottage sold this morning. I wanted you to hear it from me. She called within minutes. She was crying again, but this time it was different. Not sad crying. More like angry crying. The kind where the emotion is too big for the container. She said I had done it on purpose. I said I had done it as a property owner exercising my legal right. She said she couldn't believe I would do this to the family. I said I hadn't done anything to the family. I had done something for myself, which is not the same thing. Nathan never called. I don't think of the sale as a loss. I want to be precise about that. There's a grief in it. Of course there is. I spent 4 years building something to hold a feeling, and the feeling outlasted the place. That happens. Gerald is not in the knotty pine floors or the stone fireplace. He's in what I knew about him. The birds he never watched, the porch he never sat on, the patience he had, the way he was calm when he thought he was being wronged. I carry that. Nobody changes the lock on that. What I did with some of the proceeds, I joined a small travel club. 4 women, all within a decade of my age, all with stories that would make your jaw drop. We went to Sedona last spring. Albuquerque in the fall. Next year we're planning Asheville, which feels a little like returning to the mountains on my own terms, which I like. Claudette thinks that's poetic. I think it's just what happens when you stop waiting for other people to decide when you get to come in. I rearranged my Savannah house too. The room I'd kept as a guest room for whenever the grandchildren stayed. I kept it for the grandchildren. But I redecorated the rest of the way I'd always wanted, without anyone's input. Gerald's photo has a better spot now, on the mantel where you see it when you come through the front door. He's looking off to the side a little, the way he always looked in photos, like there was something interesting just past the frame. I like to think he'd have something to say about all of this. Probably something calm, probably something right. The last thing I'll say is this. I have a granddaughter, Avery. She's 12 now, starting to look at the world with those evaluating eyes that 12-year-olds get. She stayed with me last summer for a week, just her, no parents. On the last night, we were sitting on my porch in Savannah, and she said, "Grandma, do you miss the cottage?" I thought about it honestly. I said, "Sometimes, but I think I miss the feeling more than the place." She nodded slowly, the way kids do when they're filing something away for later. Then she said, "I think that makes sense. She's going to be okay, that one. I'm fairly sure of it." I've thought a lot about the word entitled, not as an insult, just as a description of something that happens slowly, so slowly you don't notice it until you're standing on your own front porch with a key that no longer works. Nathan didn't start out that way. Or maybe he did, and I was too willing to call it enthusiasm. That's the thing about gradual erosion. You don't feel the ground shifting until you're already somewhere you didn't mean to be. Every time I softened a boundary, I wasn't being kind. I was teaching him that boundaries were negotiable. That's on me. I own that. What I've learned, not from any book, but from standing in that moment with useless keys in my hand, is that there are consequences to every choice, in both directions. When I said yes to storing the kayaks, when I called the bachelorette weekend thing fine in a tone that was not fine, when I let the first voicemail sit for 2 days before responding, I was making choices too, small ones. And small choices stack up the same way that savings do. Except in this case, what I'd been building was someone else's certainty that I would eventually go along. The day I called the locksmith instead of calling Lynette to ask permission to enter my own home. That was the first truly clear-headed decision I'd made in probably 2 years. Not the angriest, just the clearest. There's a difference. Anger can make you sloppy. Clarity makes you precise. I showed him my name on the deed. He changed the locks. And I sat on that porch and felt something return to me that I hadn't even realized I'd been slowly handing away. Intelligence. Real intelligence. Not just the kind that scores well on tests. is knowing the difference between a relationship problem and a property problem. Lynette and I had a relationship problem. That needed time, honesty, and difficult conversations. The cottage was a property problem that needed an attorney and a locksmith. Mixing those two things up is how people end up giving away what belongs to them in the hope that it will fix something it was never going to fix. I think about Avery sometimes. 12 years old, filing things away behind her eyes. What I want her to see, not because I told her, but because she watched it happen, is that a woman who has spent decades building something, a career, a home, a life, does not have to shrink herself to keep peace with people who never built it with her. Dignity is not stubbornness. Knowing your own worth is not selfishness. Those are things I had to relearn at 64, which is embarrassing to admit and also just true. Gerald was calm when he thought he was being wronged. I always admired that. It took me a while to understand that calm is not the same as silent, and that patience with the wrong situation is not a virtue, it's just delayed pain. I think he'd have told me to call the attorney sooner, probably with a small smile and no drama whatsoever. The cottage is someone else's now. The rosebush is still there. That part I know because I asked. The rest of it, the stone fireplace, the pine floors, the creek, those belong to the buyers, and I hope they love it the way I intended to. What they can't have is what I brought back with me to Savannah, the knowledge that I did not let it be taken from me. I made a choice. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.